Sex has been the topic of a myriad of songs, of movies, stories, and every other form of media since perhaps the beginning of storytelling as a medium. We joke about it, we write tragedies that center around it, we speak about it openly and behind closed doors. Copulation, making love, the beast with two backs. It has many names and many faces. In the years since the turn of the 21st century, it has become less of a sensitive topic as it slowly invaded all aspects of life. Sex, or the hint of it, is used to sell products to us, to influence and inspire us. It is no surprise, then, that we have swung from a culture that has found the topic to be forbidden and shameful to one that glorifies it. The culture we live in is no longer sex-negative or even sex-positive, but has become hypersexual. We currently have a cultural zeitgeist which glorifies both the attainment and possession of sex objects. What this means is that both the act of being sexualized as well as being the consumer of sex are treated as positions of desire. People wish to be wanted sexually as well as to possess others sexually. The difference between these two positions are slight at first glance, but can be seen in both the widespread acceptance of porn consumption as well as in the rise of the pro-sex work and lib-fem movements. A cursory look might convince you that none of these things seem necessarily negative. After all, shouldn't we support the right to embrace one's sexuality? Shouldn't legalizing and supporting sex workers be an aim of feminism? Well, let's break it down. In recent years, the stigma against sex workers and porn consumption has begun to decrease as it becomes more mainstream. People openly joke about and reference porn, and there have even been examples of women who were able to leave the industry and become successful. Women are encouraged to use their bodies as a form of capital, without being aware of the harms that sex work, sexualization, and objectification can cause to an individual. Despite recent feminist movements working to erase the idea that women are vessels for male gratification, the glorification and acceptance of porn and prostitution works directly against that aim. Even as the media pushes a narrative that men are finally being held accountable for sexual abuse and manipulation, they are continuing to be presented with a message that supports the opposite. Take, for example, OnlyFans. OnlyFans has gained a reputation for easy sex work. A few success stories wherein women make millions off their bodies in contrast to the wealth they make in more mainstream jobs has served as an inspiration for thousands of others to attempt the same. Except because the market is so flooded, what might have once been profitable is now undervalued. Women are selling nudes for mere dollars, and because of the prevalence of offerings, sexual harassment can be seen as a job offer as long as money is offered. By presenting this as glamorous, the industry is able to pay a few women to convince everyone else to do the same for free. Perhaps if the dangers of the profession were presented openly, as is required for other dangerous professions like construction, oil work, or healthcare, one could present this as a knowing decision for these women, but many are unaware of exactly how damaging a career in the industry can be. An accurate representation of a porn industry contract would look as follows, as written by Gail Dines. Do you consent to losing control of the most intimate part of your life for as long as you live and after, because the images will live on long after you die? Exposing your body to untold millions of porn consumers who will view you as a slut or a whore. You will never be able to regain control of these images, and they will be owned and distributed by and across the porn industry. Should you decide that you no longer want the pornographic images circulating across multiple platforms, you will have limited to no legal recourse to prevent this, and most likely you will make no money beyond the initial payment. If you decide to fight this in court, you will have to pay lawyers' fees, generally around $350 per hour, with no guarantee that you will win. And even if you do, you cannot wipe out these images because they will have been spread across the internet and been downloaded by thousands, if not millions, of porn consumers. They will likely be repackaged and sold in bulk to distribution networks that will be hard to trace given that many are dispersed across the world. Catching numerous STDs, many of which are antibiotic resistant, including but not limited to chlamydia of the anus, throat, vagina, eye, gonorrhea of the anus, throat, vagina, eye, fecal throat infections, herpes of the eyes and/or nose, HIV of the eye, and hepatitis B and C. The possibility of the following happening on the porn set: anal, vaginal, throat rape, anal or vaginal tears, rectal prolapse, miscarriage if you are pregnant, being forced to doing sex acts you clearly stated in your contract that you would not do, damage to surgically implanted breasts that could rupture and would need removing, developing PTSD because of the ongoing abuse to body and soul. If any of 2 or 3 happens, you are responsible for all healthcare and medications because as contract labor you have no healthcare benefits. being attacked on social media by the pornographers if you sue to prevent further distribution of the images. There is a strong possibility they will set their lawyers on you, dig into every part of your past and present life, smear you on social media as mentally unstable, a slut, and a criminal, and so on. Very high probability of your friends, family, and any children you may have finding these images. Your children will most likely be shamed by their peers, ridiculed for having a mother who is in pornography, feel like social outcasts, and have to live in a community that will most likely see you as a slut. Living in fear of future employers finding your images on the internet and firing you because your past behavior does not follow professional protocols of the company. Living your life in a vulnerable and unsafe world that has robbed you of bodily integrity, the right to privacy, the right to control your own image, the right to live free from fear, the right to live a healthy life, the right to make mistakes and then undo these mistakes, the right to feel empowered, the right to evolve into an adult that has ownership of their life, image, sexuality, and personhood. Porn consumption itself is dangerous. Zillman and Bryant in 1986 and 1988 sought to answer what is the effect of prolonged porn consumption on subjects' perceptions of their intimate relationships, marriage and family, personal happiness, and sexual satisfaction. The study found a pool of male and female subjects, including college students and non-students, divided into two groups. Exposure group watched 1 hour of nonviolent porn per week for 6 weeks, and the control group watched an equivalent amount of regular movies. Then all subjects completed a value of marriage survey and the Indiana Inventory of Personal Happiness. They found that prolonged exposure to porn impacts the individual's sexual and personal happiness, increasing distrust and dissatisfaction with one's partner, increasing acceptance of affairs, promiscuity, and male-dominated relationships, and decreasing the desire to marry or raise a family. Given that in this era, 6 hours of exposure over 6 weeks was considered dangerous usage, what does that say about those who watch porn regularly today? While it's true that girls are more negative about pornography than boys, a greater proportion of boys reported pornography was realistic than the proportion of girls. While a minority of respondents reported sexual arousal on first viewing pornography, this rose to 49% at later viewings. While some of the respondents felt curious, shocked, or confused on first viewing of pornography, the negative feelings subsided through repeated viewing of online pornography. Increased risk of exposure to incorrect information about human sexuality long before a minor is able to contextualize this information in ways an adult brain can is dangerous. Porn usage causes viewers to overestimate the prevalence of less common practices like group sex, bestiality, or sadomasochistic activity, and causes individuals to be less satisfied with their own personal sex lives with their personal partner. Researchers concluded that consumers eventually compare appearance and performance of pornographic models with that of their intimate partners, and this comparison rarely favors their intimate partners. Additionally, porn seemed to condition participants to trivialize rape. In one study, participants were asked to read about a legal case where a man raped a female hitchhiker and then recommended a length of the rapist's prison sentence. Males in the no exposure group said 94 months. The massive exposure group said 50 months, nearly half that of the no exposure group. One quote by Dr. James B. Weaver puts this into perspective especially well. Prolonged exposure to pornography, it must be remembered, results in both a loss of respect for female sexual autonomy and the disinhibition of men and the expression of aggression against women. Gail Dines points out, if porn performers truly don't like what is happening to them, then the fantasy that users have erected about women and porn begins to crumble, and they are left with the stark reality that maybe these women are not fuck dolls, but instead are human beings with real emotions and feelings. If this is the case, then users would have to admit to becoming aroused to images of women being sexually mistreated. For those who are not sexually sadistic or cruel, this could very well be psychologically intolerable, so they have to work really hard at maintaining the fantasy that porn women are indeed unlike most women they meet in the real world. In turn, this has posited the idea that women who are not interested in casual sex to be weird, strange, and out of the norm. This has allowed for the creation of asexuality and demisexuality as tools to erase feminist concerns about sexuality and relationships. Instead of admitting that casual sex is detrimental to most women and that requiring emotional connection before sex is a common desire, which would posit the need for improvement in heterosexual relationships, instead, women are strange. We are the problem and not the society around us. Feminism began criticizing violent sex, hypersexuality in our culture, the ideas that every woman should be available for sex whenever a man wants, and many other ideas like those, and an equal and opposite reaction formed, which suggested that hypersexuality was the answer to an unsatisfying sex life. In doing so, women and girls who feel alienated by patriarchal culture no longer have a support system based on a critical theory of our society, and instead resort to microlabels. This in turn allows hyper-individualism to be used as a defense of misogynistic and damaging behaviors by presenting discomfort with them as being a different identity of its own, and therefore any criticism is suggested to be bigoted behavior. For example, I don't feel comfortable with the idea of having one-night stands and having lots of partners. Oh, Maybe you're demisexual. Maybe, but I still don't like that women are expected to be available all the time for men. Well, if they're doing it, it's because they like it, so criticizing them is anti-sex positivity. Presenting casual sex as a manner of sex actualization has only led to the prevalence of women and girls feeling as if they are strange and wrong for desiring emotional connection prior to sex. Western culture supports gender equality and levels of sexual permissiveness are arguably becoming more liberal. Engagement in casual sex is becoming increasingly acceptable, and it is noteworthy that the modest effect sizes and gender differences reported here may suggest that the disparity is decreasing. But the risk of experiencing negative emotional outcomes is still considerably greater for women than it is for men. Men are rarely threatened with social repercussions in the same way that women are. Therefore, expressing sexual autonomy is arguably less prohibitive for them. Women reported significantly more regret, loneliness, unhappiness, rejection, and negative feelings about oneself in comparison to men following their most recent hookup experience. It is important to note that this finding is consistent with research from an evolutionary perspective, which suggests that women experience more regret than men because short-term sexual relationships are considered less advantageous for women's reproductive success, and conversely, advantageous for men's reproductive success. Hence why we should question those who present casual sex as being unambiguously positive. After all, who benefits from it most? Porn itself has become more violent over the years. Type porn into Google and click around the most well-traveled websites that appear. With mind-numbing repetition, you will see gagging, slapping, verbal abuse, hair pulling, pounding anal sex, women smeared in semen, sore anuses and vaginas, distended mouths, and more exhausted, depleted, and shell-shocked women than you can count. You will not see two people having sex. You will see images depicting a level of physical cruelty that would not be out of place in an Amnesty International campaign. The same men who get off from women being brutalized and called cunts, sluts, and cum dumpsters are the ones who go on to become politicians, corporate executives, judges, media professionals, policymakers, and bankers. In other words, they become the economic and cultural elite that shape the material and ideological world that determines how women, and their children, will live. Most of them will become partners and fathers. To assume that porn is mere fantasy and does not impact the way men think and feel is to ignore decades of research on how images frame our social construction of reality. With violence and sex becoming more and more synonymous with each other, violence itself is becoming more mainstream and widely accepted. For example, strangulation and BDSM. There is no such thing as safe strangulation, and yet it is being presented as a safe and sexy option to make one's partner happy and spice up the bedroom, no different than wearing sexy lingerie. Meanwhile, this has caused alienation to individual sexuality due to a pornified and hypersexual culture. When one is presented with the same sexual cues over and over again from different men over the years, you realize a trend. Their tastes are all similar because they have been trained by the same sexual stimuli. Individual tastes and desires are overridden, which makes sex impersonal and distant from the self. Young women believe the lie that being objectified is a compliment men give them, and that if they send nudes, do porn, strip, they will be empowered. But this doesn't add up to reality, as being objectified is a way that men put them in their place. Despite men begging and paying for sex, the women who give it are the ones shamed. Revenge porn doesn't show a desperate male begging for pussy, it shows a woman being violated by a man who found the act he begged for inherently degrading to her. You aren't the issue. Your body isn't the issue. The way men view you in sex and violence is the issue. It all lies in our society and how hypersexual we've become over the years. The real question is, can we ever turn it back? This, dear viewers, is where we part. This topic is one that I find endlessly interesting because it just seems to me so obvious, in a sense. I don't know how you could ever look at porn or even how sex is portrayed in media and think that sex isn't seen as something degrading that men do to women. And yet, we're turning sex and porn into genuine influencers of our culture. Strangulation and BDSM have become more or less mainstream, and that all stems from porn bleeding into our average everyday lives. And I know this is dangerous. Many professionals know this is dangerous, but the minute you speak out about it, it becomes, well, you're oppressing other people, you're being bigoted, you're hurting someone's feelings. And it all comes down to choice feminism once again saying that if this one person enjoys it, if they choose it, then there's nothing to criticize. And to be honest, that's simply not true. Just because you choose something doesn't mean that choice didn't have a myriad of factors playing into it. And that's especially relevant today with how influential social media and social interactions online are in our personal lives. If you guys have any comments, concerns, questions, ideas, please leave them in the comments down below, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.